everyone, and we are continuing our modules in personal development for grade 12, that is for senior high school. More specifically, we are going to be discussing module 3, which still focuses on the self, and we will continue to learn about holistic growth, more specifically, the other areas of personal development. So at the end of this module, you'll be able to discuss the relationship between psychological, that is emotional and social, cognitive, moral, and spiritual development, classify the various developmental tasks according to the developmental stage and challenges being experienced during adolescence, and identify ways that help you become a capable and responsible adolescent prepared for adult life. Also, you'll be able to evaluate your development in comparison with persons of the same age group and through the help of significant people around you, like your peers, your parents, your siblings, your friends, and teachers and community leaders. It is hoped that we will be able to enrich the core values of uniqueness, constant communication, and unity, and also enhance your skills in English, science, and Christian living. And also improve on the different multiple intelligences such as in linguistic, intrapersonal, and visual spatial intelligence. Let us take this time first to clarify some words, right? We have so far discussed the different areas of personal development, such as physiological, which also touched on mental development, and also emotional development. All right. So what is the difference between emotional and mental development? Because we might be confused, right? Because when we discussed mental development, we also talked about emotions, right? So emotional development refers to one's ability to cope with and manage emotions and also have positive relationships. So when we discussed emotional development in the previous lesson, we talked about how your emotions and your ability to cope and manage your emotions can affect your social relationships. So the reason why, as we discussed previously, we need to be able to identify and regulate our emotions because we need to understand how we react to our emotions can benefit us and the relationships that we have with significant people around us. Mental development, on the other hand, refers to the ability to think clearly and make good decisions. All right. So this does not focus on your relationships with others, but this focuses on how you can think and make good decisions. And somehow your emotions and how you cope with your emotions and how you manage stress or anxiety, how you cope with this can affect how you think clearly and how you can make good decisions. All right. That is why and this is mental development. All right. So we talk about emotional and mental. They may seem similar, but there are differences that we also need to understand about each area. Now, what is the difference between cognitive and mental development? They are also closely related. Cognitive is the part related to mental function, which also deals with logic, all right? How you think, you process, your intellectual abilities. Mental development is also related to one's emotions, the mind, and the intellectual process. But the process of cognition influences mental health. Mental development is refers to the intellectual process, mind processes, but in relation to the emotions that you are feeling, the emotions that you are experiencing. The process of cognition influences mental health because how you deal with logic, how you deal with your circumstances, how you think about this, how you process this in your mind, will also influence how you cope and manage with your emotions. And what you perceive what you think, what you see, what you understand also influences your mental tasks. How you are able to continue doing your day-to-day tasks despite the stresses and the anxieties that you're experiencing at the same time. And that will affect you as well. Okay, so that is the difference between cognitive and mental development. There are very fine lines and they are very closely related. But I hope that we are able to understand the generally what cognitive and mental development what cognitive development is and what mental development is. Again, they're very closely related, and that is why we are talking about holistic growth. We cannot simply just set a boundary that we are only talking about our physical development or we're only talking about our cognitive development. We cannot say that it does not affect your emotional, your social, or your mental development, because they all affect one another and they're all improving, changing, developing at the same time. We cannot just say that we will focus first on our physical development and not focus on our emotional or mental or social development, right? So that is why we are trying to learn these different areas of personal development so that we can see what is happening in these different areas, how are they related, and what can I do so that I can grow holistically in all of those areas. I can find support in all of those areas of development. All right, so at this point, we will be talking about social and cognitive development and also spiritual and moral development. I know moral development is being introduced now as a new word, and we did not discuss this in a previous module, but we will talk about it later and why moral development is related to spiritual development or is part of one's spiritual development. So the questions that I'd like to ask you now and I'd like you to think about for a few minutes are: who is your ideal self? Who is your real self? And are they one and the same? All right? So who is your ideal self? Who is your real self? And are they one and the same? I'll give you a few moments. I'll give you a few moments to think about this. All right. So are your ideal selves and your real selves one and the same? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about who your ideal self is or who your real self is, right? For most of us, our ideals, we have this idea of who we want to be, and this is our ideal self. And a lot of us also have an idea of who we are now. This is our real self. More likely than not, our ideal self and our real self are very different from each other. But would it be safe to say that somehow the ideal self that we have projected 5 years ago, perhaps, is closer to the real self that you have now? I hope so, because right now you also have an ideal self. And while this ideal self is still very far from who you are now, you are working towards making them one and the same. So your ideal self is your standard, the standard by which you work and improve your real self. As adolescents, we have discussed that we understand that we are in the transition period between being a child and being an adult. And this period is called being caught in the middle. Sometimes your physical attributes are maturing faster than your emotional, mental, or social attributes. And that is why, as we discussed in the previous module also, and that is why most of the time we feel awkward, uneasy, we feel that we have a lack of we lack in self-confidence, no? That is why your physical changes, your physiological development also affects your mental development. You are caught in the middle. You are being asked to be more responsible, to be more mature, to be more independent, and yet you also know that you still have limitations. There's still a lot of things that you don't understand, or you can't quite comprehend. So how can they expect me to do something that I do not fully understand yet? How can they expect me to be somebody who I am not, who I'm still not? Okay? How can they expect me to be my ideal self if I myself, my real self, can understand that they are both very far from each other? Karen Horney, one of our theorists in the psychoanalytic perspective of personality theorists, has a social-cultural view of knowing oneself. She said that social and cultural conditions, especially those during your early childhood, are largely responsible for the formation of your personality. She said that the social relationship between a child and his or her parents is a key factor in one's personality and in one's development, and that the sum total of our early childhood experiences and relationships shape our personality. What does that mean? That is why she is one of the theorists in the psychoanalytic perspective, because this perspective highlights childhood experiences, highlights the importance of childhood experiences in shaping one's personality. So that is why she said whether it was positive or negative, whatever the dynamics were between you and your parent during your early childhood will speak volumes when it comes to your personality now, even when you grow to be an adult. Now, this relationship is also put to a test during the adolescent stage, because this is also the time when you recall the experiences that you had when you were a child, and the dynamics that you had with your parents, and this somehow really affects your relationship with them once you become an adolescent. And Karen Horney says that whatever social and cultural conditions took place during that time, this will still largely affect your personality now. Now, Erik Erikson had a more dynamic theory. Now, still one of the psychoanalytic perspective theories in personality, but he said that personality also develops throughout the life cycle, and it even stretches beyond infancy and develops even in old age. He says that everyone progresses through each stage of life, and this is very crucial in the development of our personality. So it is somehow more dynamic than Karen Horney's social-cultural view, because Karen Horney focuses on the childhood experience, while Erik Erikson talks about how your personality and the formation of your personality progresses across the lifespan. And these are the 8 stages of the psychosocial stages of development that Erik Erikson proposed. And he said that in each stage of development, there is a conflict that we need to resolve in order for us to develop. And in particular, when you look at the adolescence, the adolescent stage, the conflict that you are actually dealing with during this stage is identity versus role confusion. Now, we will be discussing these stages in more detail. We will be discussing this further in the next lesson. But for now, these are the 8 psychosocial stages of development. And in each stage, there is, as I said, I repeat, a crisis that we need to resolve in order for us to learn a very important virtue that will help us progress, that will help us develop through the different stages of our lives. And he also said that the different stages of psychosocial development as you progress from infancy to older adulthood increases in complexity. That's why, according to him, it is very important that you are able to resolve the conflict that you are faced with at a particular stage, because if you are not able to do that, you will carry that conflict to the next stage wherein another conflict is waiting for you. And that is why it also increases in complexity. That is why it's important that we are able to resolve this crisis. Now, again, because this is in the psychoanalytic perspective, we know that most of these things, most of these experiences that affect us developmentally are in our unconscious, or these are things that we do not consciously see happening at the moment that they are happening. That is why you have adults who will tell you, that is why if you have adults who will tell you that they have trust issues, they probably had a conflict when they were in their infancy stage that they were not able to resolve, because the conflict at that stage is trust versus mistrust. So I hope that you understand. But again, as I said earlier, we will be discussing the different stages of psychosocial development in more detail in our next lesson. Now, we proceed to the cognitive area of personal development. And the theory that we will be focusing on is Jean Piaget's theory. So this is not read any differently. You read it as Jean Piaget because he was a French theorist, and his cognitive development theory is very much accepted and used even now. All right. So Jean Piaget said that there are 4 stages of cognitive development, and these are the sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and formal operational stage. And he even added that teenagers reach the last stage of cognitive development and therefore have increased in mental capacity in terms of hypothesizing, logical, and abstract thinking. Now, Jean Piaget did not specify that there are different levels to the formal operational stage, but he simply said that the formal operational stage is reached once you become a teenager, because this is when you start thinking, hypothesizing, and thinking abstractly and logically. Now, as we discussed earlier, although your logical thinking skills are not yet as fully developed at this time, for Jean Piaget, what is important is that you are already able to practice this skill, logical thinking. As you can see, Jean Piaget focused more on the early years of life. He said that cognitive development is very crucial in the early stages. He said that cognitive development is very crucial in the early stages of a person's life. And that is why from infancy to just before your teenage years, you actually go through 3 different stages of cognitive development. Now, this illustration will tell us in more detail the different stages of Piaget's cognitive development theory. Now, if you look at Piaget's stages of cognitive development here, let us look at the example of water as an object, right? So during the sensory motor stage, which is from birth to 2 years, what is important to the child is the senses, what triggers his or her senses. So if the child is holding a glass of water, for example, the focus of the child would be on what he or she feels. If that glass is a glass of cold water, and she or he will focus on the sensation of coldness that one is feeling from touching the glass. When you proceed to the pre-operational stage, which is from 2 to 7 years old, this is when you start operationalizing that water, and you say that the object that you are seeing, the liquid that you are seeing, of course you do not know yet the word liquid, but that thing that you see in that glass is called water. All right, this is also very crucial, a very crucial stage, which is why we should not confuse children at this age when it comes to the terms or the names of specific things, especially concrete objects. I remember, although I was already beyond the pre-operational stage at this time, I remember seeing a children's television show, an American one that was being broadcasted here in the Philippines during that time, and they were dubbing. They were dubbing over the dialogue of the English dialogue, and they were using the local language, which is Filipino or Tagalog. And the image that was being shown on screen was a glass of water, and the letter W was being flashed, but the the narration went like this: wah, wah, tubig. No, tubig is the Filipino translation of water. So that will definitely confuse a child at the pre-operational stage. So that is why it is very important that we are able to help them identify, especially concrete objects, correctly. Now, when you proceed to the concrete operational stage, that is from 7 to 11 years old, you are already focusing on whether the glass, as you can see the picture here, the glass that you're holding on your right, which is low and wide, holds the same amount of water as the glass that you're holding on your left, which appears to be tall and narrow. So you're already thinking about this. You're not just thinking about the name, water, but you are thinking about the amount of water and whether the water in the glass on your right is the same amount as the water in the glass at your left, on your left side. All right. So this is the concrete operational stage. All right. Now, once you reach 12 years old and above, you are already entering you have already entered the formal operational stage. And this is when you start thinking more deeply. No, there is thinking about thinking. No, the metacognitive thinking is happening. And when you see a glass that is filled with water up to the middle, all right, part of the glass, you start to think, is this glass half empty? Is it half full? And what does it mean? Am I optimistic? Am I pessimistic? What is the significance of this half empty or half full glass? All right. So I hope that you were able to understand the different stages of Piaget's theory of cognitive development through this illustration. Now, it is also at this stage wherein still in cognitive and the cognitive area of personal development, teenagers like to go into hypothetical deductive reasoning and propositional thought. As you can see the example here, some call it laziness. If you know Garfield, the Garfield is a cartoon character, a cat who loves to sleep. Okay, more simply put, he loves to sleep. Some people would perceive that as laziness, but according to Garfield, he is in deep thought. So we philosophize, we rationalize, we come up with other alternatives to what other people see. All right. So this is hypothetical deductive reasoning. We give reasons for our actions. So, in the hope of explaining to others that how they perceive what we are doing is not really what we are doing. So that's hypothetical deductive reasoning and propositional thought. Another thing that we usually get into at this age is called personal fable. And this is when we feel that no one else understands. We believe that we are unique, we have unique abilities, and we have unique problems. Therefore, no matter what other people say, like in this illustration, but it's really not, you're making a big deal out of nothing, we always say, no, you just don't understand. And we feel like nobody understands our situation. We are the only ones going through these problems, these issues, and nobody else can understand exactly how I feel. Therefore, nobody can help me. Okay, I know this because I also used to to think this. I also went through this myself when I was an adolescent. Now, I know that a lot of us also go through what we call imaginary audience. And this is self-consciousness, the feeling as though everyone is watching. And as it is illustrated here, we feel like everybody's looking at us and we're always so self-conscious. And this is very common among a lot of adolescents. No? Because as we explained previously, we are going through a lot of changes, a lot of transitions, and sometimes we cannot handle how many and how much these changes are, how many these transitions are that we need to deal with. No, that's why this is also something that we need to understand and consider when it comes to our cognitive development, that these may be happening as well. So let us not let us try to look at things in a different perspective. Let us not think that we're the only one burdened by these problems. Let us seek help when it is needed, where it is needed, because we also want to help ourselves develop properly and fully as we transition to adulthood. Now we have come to the final part of our lecture for today, and this is on the area of spiritual development. But before we go to spiritual development, let us first just talk about moral development. Now, I say that this is part of the spiritual area of development because, as we explained previously, a lot of people think that they do not have an area of spiritual development, or they take this for granted because probably they are not practicing their faith, or they don't have any religion. They feel that the spirit or the soul is not something that they need to worry about. However, all of us have that sense of going beyond ourselves and working towards the common good. And that would fall under the spiritual area of personal development. That is why I appreciate Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development, because he is able to explain the spiritual development in layman's terms. So when he presented these stages of moral development, a lot of people began to understand that this specific area of development is also significant in their growth, in their progress. So Lawrence Kohlberg said that there are 6 stages of moral development grouped into 3 levels. These levels are pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. He said that we start our lives being centered on our needs and wants, and then we move on to considering and negotiating these personal needs and wants in order to accommodate others. And then we move to a concern for the common good. And finally, to universal principles, sometimes at the cost of being self-beneficial. So let us look at these 6 stages of moral development and grouped into these 3 levels. So this is an image of the moral stages as proposed by Lawrence Kohlberg. The first level, which is the pre-conventional level, includes both stages 1 and 2. In stage 1, we do good simply because we want to avoid punishment. So that is the earliest stage of moral development. As we move on to stage 2, we do what is good because we aim at receiving a reward. Somehow, we have been conditioned, like what B.F. Skinner mentioned in his theory. We have been conditioned that if we do a certain task or we make a certain effort, we will be rewarded because it has happened in the past. So we do what is asked because we are aiming for a reward. Now, as we move on to the next level, which is the conventional level, we will see the next 2 stages of moral development. Stage 3 is the good boy and good girl attitude. We do good because we like being called good boy or good girl, right? So it's not just to avoid punishment, it's not just to get a reward, but it becomes a general identity that we want to achieve, being a good boy or being a good girl. Now, in stage 4, it is already motivated by our loyalty to law and order. We follow the rules, we comply because we believe in the law and we are loyal to the law. We know that when we're driving in the Philippines, for example, when we drive, we stay on the right because that is orderly. That is the law. And even if there is nobody telling you to stay on the right side of the road, you know that you have to stay there because if you move to the left, it will create disorder. All right, so you are loyal to the law. Now, when we move to the next level, which is the post-conventional level, this is where we will see the final 2 stages of moral development. Stage 5 is justice and the spirit of the law. We abide by the rules, we follow the law because we believe in justice, we believe in fairness, and we believe in the spirit behind the law. We do not just follow the law blindly, but we believe in the spirit behind it. And this is also why at this particular stage, you are not just fighting to do what is good for yourself, but you're also fighting for justice. No, not just for yourself, but for people who may need that justice. And you see the law not just as something that you need to blindly follow, but you see the law because you see the spirit behind it, why it was created. And hence, if you feel that that law wasn't created for the common good, you feel that it curtails justice, you also do something about it, no? So you are already going beyond, all right? And this is already at the post-conventional level. And of course, at the final stage, which is characterized by our compliance to universal principles of ethics, this is already going very much out of our comfort zone, going beyond ourselves, and most often, or even always, we sacrifice what is beneficial to our individual selves if we know that it is better to give that up for the common good so that more people will benefit. Now, they say there are just very few people who have reached this stage of moral development. One of those people is Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who is now Saint Teresa of Calcutta. She was motivated all of her good works were motivated not because she wanted to avoid punishment or she wanted to receive a reward. In fact, she did not accept the prize money that she won for receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. She had them donated. All right, and it's not because she just wants to be called a good girl or because she's following the law, or she knows the spirit behind the law. Her motivation is for the common good, and she would do all of these things because she was guided by the universal principles of ethics. Now, once you reach this stage, you are already fully developed morally, according to Lawrence Kohlberg. Now we move on to the spiritual development. All right, and they say that persons develop and mature in holiness and grow deeper in knowledge and love for their Creator as we progress spiritually. No? And however, while some people think that they don't need to look at their spiritual area of personal development, studies have shown time and time again that those who practice their faith actively are resilient in the face of adversities. They also say these studies also say that those who believe in a higher being have a deeper sense of hope and purpose. And hope and purpose is something that a lot of us hold on to when we have reached a point wherein there is so much despair, we are troubled, we are burdened. Sometimes just being able to hold on to hope, knowing that you have a purpose and all of these things have a purpose and a reason, can really help you overcome the challenges that you are facing. Now, we will not be talking about any scientific theorist when it comes to spiritual development, but we will be talking about Saint Teresa of Avila. Saint Teresa of Avila was declared one of the few women doctors of the church because of her writings entitled The Interior Castle. And in these writings, she talked about 3 ways of the interior life, or as interpreted, 3 stages of the spiritual life. And these are the purgative, illuminative, and unitive stage. Now, earlier we said that as we progress and we mature in holiness, we grow deeper in our self-knowledge, and eventually, we also grow deeper in our love for our Creator. Why? Because as we grow spiritually, we become more aware of the purpose that He has for us, the purpose for which He created us, the purpose for which we exist in this world. And that is why Saint Teresa of Avila said that as we look deeper into ourselves, into our interior selves, we can develop further. So the first stage of our interior life or the spiritual life is called the purgative stage, and this is where we purge what we separate what is right from wrong, we determine what is right and what is wrong, and we purge what is wrong, because we realize that we will not grow deeper in our faith or in our spiritual life if we keep doing what is wrong. So that is the purgative stage, the first stage of our spiritual area of development. The second stage is the illuminative stage. This is where we are enlightened. We are enriched because we learn new things about our spiritual selves, our faith, and also about ourselves, our development. This is the illuminative stage, and we are enlightened by the teachings of our faith, the church, our pastor, people who have authority when it comes to our spiritual development. So that is the illuminative stage. And the final stage is the unitive stage. They say that as we grow deeper in holiness, we become closer to the cross of Christ. We embrace the cross of Christ. And that brings us closer essentially to God, our Creator. So this is the unitive stage, when we do not see ourselves anymore separately from how God has purposed us. When we wake up in the morning, we know that we are doing what we are doing because this is God's purpose for us. And sometimes, and most of the time, when we have reached this stage, even if we are troubled, even if we are bothered by things of this world, it is not as traumatic or as stressful, or we don't become so anxious as other people would, because we know that these things are just happening for a reason, and we will eventually overcome this, because God has a reason for everything, and God has a purpose for us being here, and God has a purpose for us experiencing what we are experiencing. So that is the unitive stage. Now, why is it important that for us to develop spiritually, we go interiorly? Saint Faustina, or Mary Faustina Kowalska, said that a talkative soul lacks both the essential virtues and intimacy with God. She said that a deeper interior life, one of gentle peace and of that silence where the Lord dwells, is quite out of the question. A soul that has never tasted the sweetness of inner silence is a restless spirit, which in turn also disturbs the silence of others. If we are to develop more spiritually, more maturely in our faith, in discovering our purpose, our life's purpose, we need to look inward. We need to drown out the noise that of the world that distract us, or sometimes we also create our own noise. So if we are to grow and develop, and we are to find that balance, that peace of mind, we have to take more time to be more intimate with God and to be more silent, to embrace silence every once in a while, and to embrace that that physical silence, and somehow in that silence learn to find the peace of Christ that passes all understanding. At this point, we can start to reflect about the different areas of personal development that we have discussed so far, and what can we say about our own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to these areas of personal development. How can this knowledge about ourselves help us grow into a more mature and responsible individual? In conclusion, let us remember that knowing your strengths and weaknesses will lead to better self-awareness and the capacity to build better relationships with other people. So that concludes our lesson, first part of Module 3, Holistic Growth. Thank you for listening.